Welcome back to Gravepath Stories. Tonight, I have 6 true New Year horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the grave path, you don't walk alone. I was leaning over the soundboard, riding the faders by muscle memory, when the second hand on the wall clock jerked once and stopped. I remember noticing it because my cue sheet told me I had 40 seconds until the station-wide countdown, and that second hand was supposed to be my anchor. I tapped the glass with my knuckle, annoyed, then glanced at the digital clock above the transmitter rack. It read 11:59 and 42. It did not change. At first, I assumed the wall clock had died. Cheap thing, always losing time. Then I looked around and realized nothing in the room was moving. The VU meters were frozen mid-bounce. The red recording light was on but not blinking. The turntable platter was spinning, but the needle was locked in the same groove, producing a soft, endless hiss instead of music. My stomach tightened in that way it does when something simple refuses to stay simple. Control to booth. Came a voice through my headset, faint and warped. You seeing this? It was Don, the announcer, alone in the booth across the hall. I pressed the talkback button. Yeah, clocks are stuck. Probably a power hiccup. Power's steady, he said. My wristwatch stopped too. I looked down at my own watch. Same time, 11:59 and 42. I swallowed and forced my voice to stay level. I'll check the breaker panel. I took 2 steps toward the door and stopped when the phone rang. The main request line lit up, the old rotary phone rattling against the desk like it was angry. That phone never rang during countdowns. Listeners were busy drinking or kissing or yelling at televisions. I stared at it for a full breath before picking it up. Radio station, I said. A man's voice came through, breathless, not slurred, not joking. There's going to be a crash on Highway 1, just past the grain silos. Midnight. A truck runs the light. My first thought was prank. New Year's Eve brought them out. Sir, this is... It's already happening, he cut in. You have to stop the count. The line went dead. I stood there with the receiver pressed to my ear, heart hammering, listening to nothing. Before I could hang up, the phone rang again. Another line this time. I picked it up. My sister's car. A woman said, voice shaking. She's driving back from Regina. She's going to hit ice near the old bridge at midnight. She doesn't see it yet. I felt cold creep up my arms. Ma'am, how do you know that? I just do, she said. Please. I slammed the receiver down and ran to the hallway. Don was halfway out of the booth. Headphones crooked on his head. Phones are lighting up, he said. What the hell is going on? I don't know, I said. But we don't have midnight. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's not funny. I dragged him into the control room and pointed at the clocks. He swore under his breath. The phones rang again, and again. Every line blinking. Answer 1, Don said. Just listen. I picked up the nearest line. A calm male voice spoke, almost bored. Gas explosion on Ash Avenue. Basement furnace. Family of 4, midnight. My hands were shaking. Why are you calling us? Because you're counting, he said. You make it real. I hung up hard. They're predicting accidents, I said. Specific ones. Don stared at me. You're serious? Another phone rang. Don answered it this time. His face drained of color as he listened. When he hung up, he whispered, "They named my street." The hiss from the turntable grew louder, crawling under my skin. I shut it off and brought up the emergency music cart. But the tape head wouldn't move. Everything was locked in place, like the room itself was holding its breath. "We have to stop the broadcast," Don said. "If we kill the transmitter," I said, "we might not get it back." He grabbed my arm. "People are going to get hurt." I looked at the clocks again. Still 11:59 and 42. The phones kept ringing, overlapping now, a chorus of warnings. My chest felt tight, like I was running out of air. "Listen," I said. "What if they're messing with us? What if it's coincidence?" "Too many," Don said. "Too detailed." Another call came through. I answered without thinking. A young boy's voice, thin and scared. "My dad's on the road. He's tired. He's going to fall asleep at midnight." Something snapped inside me then. "Okay," I said. "Okay." I yanked the main power switch for the studio. The lights went out. The hiss stopped. The phones went silent. For one blessed second, there was nothing. Then the backup generator kicked in, humming low. Emergency lights flickered on. The digital clock above the rack blinked once and changed. 11:59 and 43. Don let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. It moved. The phones exploded into noise. All lines at once, shrill and relentless. I backed away from the board like it had bitten me. "Don't answer," I said. "They won't stop," he said. "We're back on air." I looked at the broadcast monitor. Our signal was live. The countdown tape was cued, waiting for my mark. 5 seconds, Don said weakly. "We're supposed to start at 45. I closed my eyes. Every caller had said midnight. Not the countdown, midnight itself. "Skip it," I said. "Don't count." He shook his head. "Dead air on New Year's Eve. The station manager will kill us." "I don't care," I said. "Fill it with anything." He went back into the booth and started talking, rambling about resolutions, about music, about nothing at all. His voice wobbled, but he kept going. I watched the clock tick forward, slow and steady now, 1 second at a time. 11:59 and 50. The phones rang again. One line broke through the others, ringing louder somehow. I answered it without meaning to. "You didn't stop it," the first man said. "You delayed it." My throat was dry. "What do you want?" "For you to finish," he said. "The count matters." I hung up and ripped the phone cord out of the wall. Don's voice faltered over the speakers. "Something's wrong," he said on air. "Folks, bear with us." The clock hit 11:59 and 58. I reached for the countdown tape. My hand hovered. If I didn't play it, midnight would still come. But maybe the ritual mattered. Maybe the act of naming it, of marking it together, was the trigger. 11:59 and 59. Don looked at me through the glass, eyes wide, silently begging for direction. I shook my head and held up my hands, palms out. The clock changed. Midnight. Nothing happened. For a heartbeat, the world stayed still. Then the phone started ringing again, but this time the calls were different. Confused. Panicked. People asking if we'd heard about accidents, about sirens, about a crash near the grain silos, a gas explosion on Ash Avenue, a pileup by the old bridge. Don sank into his chair. They're happening anyway. I felt hollow, but not because of us. The clocks kept moving. Time was normal again. The equipment responded. The night went on in a blur of emergency bulletins and shaky music sets. By morning, the station manager had a stack of reports and a face like stone. We were suspended pending review. The official story blamed drunk drivers, bad weather, bad luck. No one connected it to us. No one asked why we skipped the countdown. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the phones. I replayed the moment over and over, wondering if I'd made the right choice. The calls stopped after midnight, like a tap turned off. They never came again. I stayed at the station for another year. Every New Year's Eve after that, I took the late shift and killed the countdown tape myself. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and didn't want to ask. I still don't know who was calling. I don't know how they knew. But I know this: time doesn't need us to move forward. It just waits to see if we'll try to name it. And every year, when the clocks reach 11:59 and 42, my hands start to shake, and I watch them very, very closely, ready to pull the plug again if they ever stop. I'm gripping the wheel with my left hand and fighting the vibration through the blade with my right, when the radio crackles and dies, cutting the last voice I heard mid-sentence. I glance at the dash, annoyed more than worried, because dead spots happen on the industrial route, and tonight is supposed to be routine. Clear the loop, report in, go home. I ease off the accelerator as the plow catches something harder than packed snow, a deep jolt that rattles my teeth and sends a shudder up my arms. I swear out loud, lean forward, and check the mirrors, expecting to see debris or a broken pallet dragged from one of the yards. There's nothing. Just the cleared lane behind me, smooth and dark, like I never touched it. I slow to a crawl, heart ticking faster than the engine, and radio into dispatch, giving my call sign and asking if anyone else lost signal. Static answers me. I tap the mic again, harder this time, and feel stupid for it. The road ahead curves past the warehouses, a stretch I've driven so many winters. It's muscle memory. I tell myself the hit was ice, a buried ridge, something ordinary, and push forward. The plow hums, the vibration steadies, and for a few minutes everything feels normal again. I start thinking about coffee, about how the shift ends soon, about how quiet the city feels after New Year when everyone's slept it off. The next impact comes without warning. No gradual resistance, no scrape. Just a sudden stop that snaps my head forward and slams the harness into my shoulder. The engine stalls. Silence floods the cab so fast it feels loud. My hands are shaking when I twist the key and bring the engine back, my breath fogging the inside of the windshield. I sit there, listening, waiting for the sound of metal settling or alarms screaming, but nothing follows. I swallow and step out into the cold, boots crunching softly as I walk to the front. The blade is bent inward on the right side, paint scraped clean, steel scored deep like it hit solid rock. I run my glove along the damage and feel grooves that weren't there an hour ago. There's no debris, no sign of what I struck, no gouge in the road. The surface is clean, cleared down to asphalt. I stand there longer than I should, scanning the empty yards and dark loading bays, feeling watched without seeing anyone. Eventually I climb back into the cab, heart still racing, and call dispatch again. This time I get through. They sound tired. I tell them about the damage, about hitting something twice on the same stretch. There's a pause, keys clicking, and then the dispatcher says she doesn't see me on the map. I laugh once, sharp and humorless, and say that's funny because I'm looking at my GPS and it shows me right where I should be. Another pause. She asks me to read off my coordinates. I do, slowly, careful. She tells me those coordinates don't exist in the system, that the route I'm describing isn't active tonight. I tell her she's wrong, that I've been clearing it for over an hour. She asks me to pull over and wait. Sitting there, engine idling, I watch the GPS screen blink and then reset. The route line disappears. My position icon floats on a blank grid, disconnected from any road. I tap the screen, thinking it froze, but it stays empty. Fuel level drops a notch as the minutes pass, but when I glance back it jumps up again, like it never moved. I tell dispatch this, my voice tight, and she tells me to stay put, and that she's sending someone to check. I don't like the way she says it, like she's humoring me. While I wait, I check the clock. Midnight passed hours ago, but the dash clock now reads just before midnight again. I tap it, thinking it's malfunctioning too, and the digits flicker before settling back where they were. I feel a cold pressure behind my eyes, a headache building, and I rub my face through my gloves. I think about home, about warmth, about how I should have been done by now. I think about the hit, about the way it felt like driving into something that gave way and then wasn't there. Headlights appear in the distance, sweeping across the yards. Relief loosens my chest until the lights pass right through the space ahead of me and vanish, like a truck driving behind a wall I can't see. My radio crackles again, and dispatch tells me the supervisor is on site and doesn't see me. I look down at my hands, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ache, and tell her I'm sitting in the middle of the lane. She asks me to honk. I do, laying on the horn until my ears ring. She says there's no sound. Panic rises then, hot and dizzying. I open the door and step out again, waving my arms, shouting into the empty night. My breath tears at my throat. There's still no one. The road stretches away, cleared and perfect, but I have the sudden, awful sense that it doesn't connect to anything anymore. I climb back in, slam the door, and start driving, slow at first, then faster, following the curve I know by heart. The warehouses pass, familiar shapes sliding by, and for a moment I think I imagined it all. Then the road ends where it shouldn't. Not in a barrier or a drop, but in a seamless continuation of cleared asphalt that loops back on itself. I recognize a dented fence, a cracked sign, landmarks I passed earlier. My stomach drops as I realize I'm back where I started, the same spot, the same invisible boundary. I stop, breathing hard, and understand with a sick certainty that whatever I hit is part of this loop. Whatever shouldn't be here but is. I call dispatch and tell them I'm turning back, heading to the depot. They say I never left it. They tell me my truck hasn't moved all night. I look at the damage on the blade, the deep scars, and feel tears sting my eyes. I tell them to check the plow. They say the plow is parked, undamaged. I ask them whose truck I'm in, then, and they don't answer. I make a decision I don't want to make. I line up the truck and drive straight toward the place where the second impact happened, heart hammering, jaw clenched. The air feels thick as I accelerate. At the exact spot, the resistance hits again, but this time I don't brake. The cab lurches, metal screams, and for a split second, I feel like I'm pushing through something heavy and yielding, like wet earth. Then the pressure releases. The truck surges forward, and the world snaps back into place. The radio erupts with voices calling my name. The GPS redraws the route in a rush of lines. The clock jumps forward. I pull over, shaking so badly I can barely shut the engine down. Minutes later, the supervisor's truck skids to a stop behind me, and he runs up, eyes wide. He stares at the blade, at the damage that matches the dents on his own bumper from a collision weeks ago that never made sense. He doesn't ask many questions. Neither do I. Later in the depot, they pull the logs. My route data is gone. Fuel records show I never burned a drop. Timestamps skip from start to end with nothing in between. Officially, my shift didn't happen. The only proof is the bent steel, the scars that don't match any recorded accident. They fix the blade and file it under wear and tear. I sign the paperwork with a hand that still trembles. I don't plow that road anymore. Someone else does, and they swear it's fine. Sometimes, when I drive past in daylight, I feel a tug, a sense of something unfinished beneath the road. I don't tell anyone that on quiet nights, just before midnight, my phone loses signal in that area, and my location drifts off the map. I don't tell them because it sounds crazy. I tell you because I need you to know that some roads remember being broken, even when the records say they were never there. I was wiping juice off the coffee table when Liam tugged my sleeve and said, very calmly, that New Year had already happened. I laughed without looking at him and told him we still had hours to go. He didn't laugh back. He pointed at the corner beside the television, the one with the plant his mum always forgot to water, and said the guests had left without their coats. I straightened up then, because his voice wasn't playful or dramatic. It was factual, like he was correcting me. I asked him what guests. He frowned, as if I was being slow, and said the ones who came when the clocks were wrong. I checked my phone out of habit. It was just after 9 in the evening, plenty of time before midnight. Liam was 7, small for his age, with a habit of staring past people when he thought about things. I'd babysat him before. He liked routines, cartoons at set times, lights off in the hallway, exactly the same every night. This wasn't normal behavior for him. I knelt and asked who the guests were. He shrugged and said they were cold and didn't talk much. I told him sometimes our brains make stories when we're tired. He shook his head and said he wasn't tired because he'd already slept after New Year. That made my stomach tighten a little. I asked him where his parents were when the guests came. He said upstairs, but also not upstairs, and that didn't make sense, so I told him we'd make hot chocolate and watch a movie. As I filled the kettle, I noticed the microwave clock was blinking, like it had lost power. That was odd, because nothing else had reset. The oven clock still showed the right time. I set the microwave again without thinking much of it. When I turned back, Liam was still staring at the corner. I asked him to sit at the table. He did, but he kept twisting to look over his shoulder. He asked me if I was going to stay after midnight. I said yes, of course. His parents wouldn't be back until late. He said quietly that I wouldn't like staying after midnight twice. I felt a flicker of irritation then, the kind that comes when a child starts talking nonsense and you're already tired. I told him New Year only happens once. We sat on the couch with the movie playing, but Liam didn't watch it. He kept whispering things I couldn't quite catch. When I asked him to repeat himself, he said he was counting the guests so they didn't forget anyone. I asked how many there were. He said more than before. Before what, I asked? Before they left the coats. I muted the television and told him firmly that there were no guests and that he was safe. He looked at me like he was trying to decide whether to correct me again. Finally, he said okay, but his eyes slid back to the corner immediately. I checked my phone again. No messages from his parents. Everything was normal. I told myself kids say strange things, especially on nights when there's excitement. Still, I stood up and walked to the corner he kept pointing at. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I wanted to prove to myself there was nothing there. Just the plant, the wall, the socket. Liam asked me not to stand there. I laughed and asked why. He said that was where they waited before leaving. I asked where they went. He said home, but not the same home. I told him it was bedtime soon, even though it wasn't, because I wanted him settled. Upstairs, I tucked him in and read a story. Halfway through, he asked me if the clocks were fixed yet. I asked what he meant. He said the clocks were wrong when the guests came, all of them saying different times. I checked his bedside clock. It was fine. I showed him. He frowned and said it hadn't said that before. I told him sometimes clocks get confused. He seemed to accept that and turned onto his side. As I left, he said softly, "Don't forget to lock the coats." I went back downstairs feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't fully explain. The house felt the same, but my awareness of it had sharpened. I noticed small things, like how quiet it was without the television, how the ticking of the hallway clock sounded louder than usual. I checked that clock. It said 10:42. I sat on the couch and scrolled my phone. A few minutes later, I glanced up and noticed the hallway clock now said 10:42 again. That caught my attention. I stared at it, waiting for it to tick. It didn't. After what felt like a long time, it jumped to 10:43. I told myself it was old. Battery issues. Still, I stood up and checked the oven clock. It said 10:48. The microwave clock said 10:43. None of them matched. My phone buzzed then. A message from Liam's mum saying they were running late, but everything was fine. Relief washed over me. I replied okay and told myself to stop being silly. A soft sound came from the living room corner. Like fabric brushing fabric. I froze, listening. It happened again, clearer this time. I walked toward it slowly. The plant leaves were still. Nothing was there. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I turned, expecting Liam. He was standing halfway down, rubbing his eyes. He asked me why the guests were back. I told him no one was back and asked him to go to bed. He shook his head and said they hadn't all left the first time. He pointed past me. I didn't want to turn around, but I did. There was nothing visible, but the air felt different there, colder, heavier. I can't explain it better than that. I asked Liam what he saw. He said coats on the floor, all empty. He said they were waiting for the clocks to agree. I felt my heart start to race. I told him firmly that this was enough, that he was dreaming. He started to cry then, real tears, saying he didn't want them to stay. I picked him up and carried him upstairs, telling myself I was overreacting. I sat with him until he fell asleep again. When I checked my phone, it said 11:59. That made no sense. I'd only been upstairs a few minutes. I checked again. It changed to 11:58. I went downstairs quickly. The hallway clock said 11:59. The oven clock said 12:00. The microwave clock was blinking again. A sound like a door opening came from the living room, though no door was there. I felt a pressure in my ears, like when you change altitude. The hallway clock chimed midnight, once, loud and wrong. Liam screamed upstairs. I ran to him. He was sitting up, pointing past me again, shouting that they were leaving without coats again, and this time they were angry. I turned and saw nothing, but the cold was stronger, wrapping around my legs. I grabbed my phone and called his parents. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking. When I hung up, my phone said it was 9:15. I laughed then, a short, panicked sound. I told myself it was stress, that I was misreading things. Liam sobbed and begged me to make them go. I asked him how. He said the coats needed to be locked so no one could take them back. I didn't understand, but I asked where the coats were. He said downstairs, where they left them last time. I carried him with me, holding him tight. In the living room, the air was so cold my breath fogged. On the floor by the corner, there were shapes. Not clear ones, but impressions, like something heavy had rested there. I felt sick. Liam told me to close the door. I said, "What door?" He pointed at the wall. I felt stupid, but I mimed closing something, stepping back. He shook his head and said that wasn't it. He climbed down and walked to the hall closet, the one where his parents kept coats. He opened it and pointed inside. It was empty, every hanger bare. That closet had been full earlier, I was sure. He said they took them back. That was bad. That meant New Year would happen again. I asked him how to stop it. He said we had to keep the time the same. We had to pick one and not let it change. I asked which one. He said the first one, before they came. I checked the clocks. None matched. I picked my phone and set an alarm, watching the seconds tick. I told him this was the time. He nodded and told me not to look away. The hallway clock chimed again. Midnight. The cold surged. I felt dizzy. I focused on my phone, counting breaths, seconds. Liam squeezed my hand hard. Slowly, the pressure eased. The cold faded. The impressions on the floor softened, disappeared. The hallway clock stopped chiming. My phone alarm went off. Silence settled. I checked the time. 12:05. All the clocks matched now. Liam slumped against me, exhausted. I carried him upstairs and put him to bed. He was asleep almost instantly. I sat on the stairs until his parents came home, just after 1 in the morning, apologetic and unaware. I told them he'd had bad dreams. I didn't tell them about the clocks or the coats. When I left, I checked the hall closet. All the coats were back. I never babysat on New Year again. I still don't know who the guests were. But sometimes, when midnight comes, I check my clocks and make sure they agree. Because I remember how calm Liam sounded when he said New Year had already happened, and how certain he was that it could happen again. I was pushing the medication trolley back toward the nurse's station when someone in the far bay started singing. Auld Lang Syne, again. loud and cheerful, the way drunk people do just before midnight. I stopped dead, my hand still gripping the chipped metal handle, and checked my watch out of habit. It showed 12:30, 5 in the morning. We had already crossed into the new year once. I was certain of it, because I remembered clapping with the other nurses, remembered the plastic cups of warm lemonade, remembered thinking I would finally be able to go home after this round. I told myself it was just a patient confused by sedation. That happened all the time on night shifts. Still, my stomach tightened as I walked toward the sound. Mrs. Halcrow, post-operative, hip replacement, had been asleep less than an hour ago. Now she was sitting upright, hands clapping weakly, smiling at nothing. "Happy New Year, love," she said when she saw me, like she'd been waiting. "It's already happened," I told her gently, pressing her back against the pillow. "You need to rest." She frowned, genuinely puzzled, and then her eyes slid past me toward the ward clock. "No, it hasn't," she said. "Look, they're about to count." I turned. The clock's second hand was sweeping normally, but the minute hand was inching backward, not forward. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were tired, but it kept moving the wrong way. When it reached 12 exactly, the second hand stopped. The ward lights flickered once, just enough to make my heart jump, and from every bed came the sound of people cheering. Behind me, someone popped open a bottle. I spun around, my breath sharp in my chest. Patients who should have been asleep or sedated were sitting up, clapping, calling out to each other. A man with a fractured jaw was shouting through his bandages. Even the stroke patient in bed 6 was smiling and moving his fingers. I backed away, my mind racing for explanations that made sense. Power surge, electrical fault, mass confusion. Anything but what it felt like, which was the ground slipping slightly out from under me. I rushed back to the nurses' station. The charts were laid out neatly, exactly how I'd left them an hour earlier. Too neatly. I flipped open Mrs. Halcrow's file. The notes I had written after midnight, the pain score adjustment, the medication time, were gone. The last entry was from 11:45 in my own handwriting, neat and calm, like nothing had happened since. "No," I whispered, and checked another chart. Same thing. Another, all reset to just before midnight. My pulse hammered in my ears. I looked at the clock above the station. It read 11:59. A cheer rose again, swelling and overlapping, and then the singing started, echoing down the corridor. Too loud for a hospital at night. I felt suddenly exposed, like the only person awake in a room full of sleepwalkers. I ran to the staff room and found Claire standing by the sink, pouring tea. She looked tired but normal, rubbing her eyes. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "The patients, the clocks, the charts, something's wrong." She gave me a confused smile. "You're jumpy tonight. It's New Year. They get excited." "It already happened," I insisted. "We already did it." She frowned, glancing at her watch. "It's about 2. The room seemed to tilt. "Claire, listen to me. We crossed midnight. We celebrated. You joked about resolutions." She shook her head slowly, like I was the one confused. "You must have nodded off." Before I could argue, the lights flickered again, and from the ward came the countdown, voices chanting together, 10, 9, 8. Claire joined in automatically, smiling, raising her mug. I stood frozen, my mouth dry, listening as the numbers fell away. When they hit 0, the sound was deafening. Applause, laughter, someone whooping. And then, just as suddenly, silence. I turned back to Claire. Her mug was back on the counter, full. The kettle was cold. She looked at me blankly. "Why are you staring at me like that?" I stumbled out without answering. The ward was quiet again. Patients lay back in their beds, eyes closed, monitors beeping steadily. The clock ticked forward now, normal, innocent. It read 12:05. I checked the charts with shaking hands. My notes were back. The midnight entries restored, exactly as I remembered writing them. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, laughing softly at myself. Stress, that was all. Long shift, holiday madness. Then the monitor in bed 3 flatlined. I was at his side in seconds, calling his name, checking his pulse. Nothing. The man's skin had gone grey. His eyes open and unseeing. I shouted for help, hit the alarm, started compressions. Claire rushed in, then another nurse, then the crash team. We worked him hard, sweat dripping down my spine, arms burning. We called it after 20 minutes. I stood there afterward, hands on my knees, chest heaving, staring at the still body. Death on shift wasn't new to me, but something about this felt wrong, like a line crossed. I wrote the time of death carefully on the chart, my hand steady through sheer force of will. When I looked up, the ward clock read 11:59. My stomach dropped. "No," I said out loud, my voice echoing strangely. I spun toward the station, flipping through the charts in a blind panic. Bed 3's file was clean. No code, no time of death. The last entry was pre-midnight vitals. From the beds, the singing began again. I backed away, shaking my head. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. I ran to bed 3 and ripped back the curtain. The man was breathing. He opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "Happy New Year, nurse," he said. I staggered back, my mind screaming. He had been dead. I had felt his ribs give under my hands. There was no mistaking it. The countdown started again. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it, feel it vibrating in my bones. When 0 hit, the lights flickered, and the ward reset itself like a bad recording. This time, I didn't go along with it. I watched everything closely. After midnight, I made a small mark on the desk with a pen, just a scratch. When the clock slid back, the scratch vanished. When it moved forward again, it reappeared. The world wasn't looping exactly. It was being overwritten. I tested it again, hiding a paperclip in my pocket. After the reset, it was gone. Not dropped. Gone. Panic settled into something colder, more focused. Whatever this was, it was using the hour after midnight like a rehearsal, erasing anything that didn't fit. I watched bed 3 closely. Each loop, his condition worsened a little sooner. A cough appeared earlier. His breathing grew labored faster. It was like the reset wasn't perfect. Like death was learning. I cornered Claire between loops, shaking her shoulders, begging her to remember. Each time, she looked at me with concern, then confusion, then nothing. She reset harder than the patients, like she belonged to the system, not the ward. The 5th time it happened, I realized the truth. The reset wasn't saving anyone. It was delaying something inevitable, dragging it out, making us relive the same hour while the damage accumulated underneath. When bed 3 flatlined again, earlier than before, I didn't call the code. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, watching the monitor. The line went flat and stayed flat. No cheer followed. No singing. The clock didn't move. The ward was silent, heavy. The light stayed steady. I checked the charts. This time, the death stayed written. My pen scratch stayed on the desk. The paperclip was still in my pocket. I felt a wave of grief and relief crash over me, so strong my legs gave out. The reset had stopped. We finished the shift in stunned quiet. No more celebrations, no more loops. Just the slow, awful work of a hospital at night. I never told anyone what really happened. I said the shift was rough. I said New Year was strange. That was enough. Years later, I still think about that man, about how many times he died without knowing, about how close I came to being erased with the rest of it. I left nursing not long after. I couldn't stand the clocks anymore. And every New Year's Eve, when the countdown starts, I feel my heart race and my hands sweat, waiting to see if time will decide to let us move forward or make us do it all again. I am adjusting the tripod head with one hand and wiping condensation off the lens with the other when the studio manager whispers that we are live. And I nod without looking at him because my eyes are locked on the monitor, on my own framing, on the way the host's hands tremble slightly as she shuffles her cue cards. My headset hums with the low electrical sound it always makes before a long night. And I tell myself this is just another New Year broadcast. Another quiet shift where nothing happens and everyone pretends it matters. I zoom in a fraction, then pull back, chasing a balance that feels wrong in my chest. I have been doing camera work for years, long enough that my body knows the motions, even when my mind drifts. The clock on the wall above the control room window is counting down toward midnight, its second hand ticking with a confidence I do not feel. I swallow, adjust my stance, and remind myself to breathe. The host starts talking about resolutions, about fresh starts, about how this year will be different. And I almost laugh, because that line is older than the building we are standing in. The producer's voice crackles in my ear, telling me to hold the shot. Stay steady, do not drift. I say okay, even though he cannot hear me unless I press the button, and I do not bother pressing it. My phone buzzes in my pocket. I ignore it. It buzzes again, and I curse silently because nobody texts me during a live broadcast unless something is wrong. I shift my weight, trying not to shake the camera, and feel the vibration stop. I tell myself I will check it after midnight, after the countdown, after the polite applause that always sounds forced in an empty studio. The first call comes in just before the final minute. I hear the receptionist's voice faintly through the open door, tense and confused. She says someone is on the line asking about the broadcast, asking if it is really live. That is normal, I think. People ask that every year. I focus on my framing and let it go. Then another call. Then another. The receptionist's voice rises, sharp with irritation, and she looks through the glass at the control room as if asking for help. The producer waves her off, points at the clock, mouths later. We are too close to midnight to deal with curious viewers. The host begins the countdown. 10, 9, 8. The numbers echo in my head, heavy and slow. My phone buzzes again. I glance down without thinking and see missed calls, all from numbers I do not recognize. There is a voicemail notification. My throat tightens. 7, 6, 5. The lights feel hotter, closer. I feel like I am standing under something about to fall. 4, 3, 2, 1. Cheers. Confetti cannons fire weakly, spitting paper that flutters down like tired snow. The host smiles too wide and shouts Happy New Year, her voice cracking just a little. I hold the shot, steady as I can, and wait for the producer to call cut. But he does not. The applause track loops, awkwardly long. The host glances off camera, her smile faltering. The producer finally says cut, his voice strained, and the studio exhales as one. I lower the camera slightly and rub my shoulder, feeling the familiar ache. Before anyone can speak, the receptionist bursts into the control room, her face pale. She is holding the phone like it might bite her. She says the calls are not stopping. She says they keep saying they watched the broadcast. She says they are describing things that did not happen. The producer tells her to calm down, asks her what she means. She swallows and says, "One caller thanked us for the segment about the blackout in the Southern District, except we never mentioned a blackout. Another caller complained about the sound cutting out during the countdown, except our audio never dropped." I feel a chill creep up my spine. I tell myself this is coincidence, misunderstanding, people projecting their own experiences onto a generic broadcast. It happens. I have seen it before. I want to believe that. My phone buzzes again. I pull it out this time. There are more missed calls, more voicemails. My hands feel clumsy as I open the first message. A man's voice fills my ear, breathless and excited. He says he loved the show. He says it was strange seeing the host hesitate like that when the lights flickered. He says he was watching from the old rail yard, and the signal was surprisingly clear. The old rail yard has been abandoned for decades. There is no power there, no screens, no anything. I feel my mouth go dry. I play the next message. A woman, laughing softly, says she watched from her apartment overlooking the river. Except the details she gives do not match any building in the city. She describes a view that does not exist, a bend in the water that I know is not there. Around me, the studio hums with confused energy. The host is arguing quietly with the producer. The receptionist is crying now, saying the lines are still lighting up. Someone suggests it is a prank, a coordinated joke. Someone else says the transmitter might be leaking signal in a strange way. I step back from the camera and sit down hard on a folding chair. My heart is racing, each beat loud in my ears. I have spent my life behind lenses, watching reality flatten into frames. But this feels like something else, something wrong. The producer asks if anyone mentioned anything specific, anything we could verify. The receptionist nods, wipes her face, and says one caller described the small crack in the studio wall behind the host's left shoulder, the one we keep meaning to fix. She says he described the way the confetti got stuck in the light rig and had to be pulled down later. I feel sick. That is not public. That is not visible from the broadcast. That is behind the scenes. The producer turns to me then, his eyes sharp. He asks if the camera feed could have been intercepted, if someone could be watching something they should not. I shake my head slowly. I say the system is closed, local. I say there is no external monitor feed, except the broadcast itself. My phone rings. I answer without thinking, pressing it to my ear. A child's voice comes through, small and calm. The child says they liked the colors. The child says they watched from the place with no doors. I ask what they mean, my voice barely steady. The child laughs, and says the place that used to be a hospital before it forgot. I hang up, my hands shaking. I feel eyes on me, but I cannot look up. I am trying to make sense of the words, trying to fit them into a world that still follows rules. The producer calls the station director, his voice low and urgent. The host sits down heavily, rubbing her temples. Someone suggests shutting down the lines. Someone else suggests pulling the recording and checking it for anomalies. I stand up, suddenly certain of one thing. I say we need to check the raw footage. The producer nods, grateful for something concrete to do. We move to the editing bay, a small room that smells like dust and warm plastic. I load the footage, my fingers moving on instinct. The timeline appears, familiar and comforting. I scrub through the countdown, watching the host's face, the confetti, the smiles. Everything looks normal. Too normal. Then I notice something off. A reflection, barely there, in the dark glass behind the set. I pause, zoom in. There is a shape that does not belong. A suggestion of movement where there should be none. I play it again. The shape shifts, resolving into a cluster of faces, pressed close together, watching. I feel my breath catch. I did not see them when I was filming. I would have noticed. I always notice reflections. It is my job. The producer leans over my shoulder, swears softly. He asks if that is real. I do not answer. I scrub forward. The faces remain, sometimes clearer, sometimes fading, always there. They are not in the studio. They are not anywhere I recognize. The phone rings again, distant but insistent. The receptionist answers, her voice numb now. She puts it on speaker. A man speaks, his tone polite, almost bored. He says he watched from the northern block that never got finished. He says he enjoyed the honesty of the camera operator, the way I adjusted the focus when I was nervous. He thanks me by name. I feel something inside me break. I did not introduce myself. My name was not on screen. I step back, my legs weak. The producer asks how they could know that. I have no answer. I think of the faces in the reflection, of the impossible locations, of the child's voice talking about a place that forgot. The station director arrives, flanked by 2 security guards. He listens, frowning, and then makes a decision. He orders the broadcast archived and sealed. He orders the phones shut off. He orders everyone to go home and get some rest, says we will sort it out in the morning. I want to argue. I want to say this is not something you sleep on. But I am so tired, so hollowed out by fear, that I just nod. I pack up my camera in silence. The studio feels different now, smaller, as if it has already been emptied of something important. As I leave, I glance back at the set, half expecting to see faces pressed against the glass. There is nothing. Just my reflection, pale and shaken. At home, I cannot sleep. My phone stays silent, but I keep checking it, waiting for it to buzz. When dawn finally comes, I feel no relief. I know this is not over. The next day, the story breaks anyway, not in the way I expect. People begin posting online, sharing their experiences of watching a broadcast that did not officially exist in their locations. They share descriptions, details, moments that match our footage exactly. Some of the places they describe are real but abandoned. Some are not real at all. The station issues a statement. Blames signal bleed, atmospheric interference. Experts are trotted out to explain it away. I watch the coverage from my apartment, my camera sitting untouched in its case. Every explanation feels thin, brittle. Then I get a message, not a call. A text from an unknown number. It says, "Thank you for showing us the year." It says we do not get many markers anymore. It says the places without names are grateful. I stare at the screen for a long time. My hands are steady now, in a way they were not before. I think about the faces in the reflection, about watching and being watched, about how cameras do not just record, they connect. I reply, against my better judgment. I ask who they are. The response comes quickly. It says they are the audience that remains when there is nowhere left to sit. It says they are what happens when places are emptied, but not erased. It says the broadcast reached them because it was honest, because it was live, because it did not pretend to be more than it was. I do not know why that comforts me. Maybe because it gives shape to the fear. Maybe because it means there is a reason. I delete the message. I turn off my phone. I decide not to tell anyone else about that part. Some truths do not help when shared. I still work with cameras, but not like before. I am careful now, more aware of reflections, of edges, of what might be looking back. Every new year, when the countdown begins, I feel that old tension return, and I wonder who might be watching from places I cannot imagine. Nothing like that has happened again. At least, not to me. The station eventually moved buildings. The old one was sold, then demolished. Sometimes I drive past the empty lot and feel a strange sense of loss, like something was taken away unfinished. When people ask me why I left broadcast work, I tell them I wanted something quieter. That is true, in a way. I wanted a world where audiences stay where they are supposed to be. But on New Year nights, when the air feels tight and expectant, I still think about that broadcast, about the unseen viewers, about how easily a signal can slip through cracks we do not know are there. And I tell myself that if I ever find myself behind a live camera again at midnight, I will remember that I am not just showing the world to itself. I am opening a door.